Ashamed of his wife, a man decides to take his lover to a business meeting, but when he gets there, he discovers the surprise his wife prepared for him. Mark Thompson sat in his sleek, glass-walled office, the city sprawling beneath him like a mosaic of ambition and desire. The soft hum of the air conditioning barely masked the sound of his racing thoughts. He glanced at the clock on the wall, 10 minutes to his important business meeting. His heart sank as he shifted his gaze to a framed photograph on his desk. It depicted him and his wife, Linda, at a family gathering, her warm smile radiating a kind of innocence he had come to resent. As he studied her face, a pang of guilt washed over him, mixing uneasily with the embarrassment that had become a familiar companion. Linda had always been the girl next door, the high school sweetheart who had stood by him through the trials of his early career. However, as his status rose, so did his expectations of those around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't quite fit into his world anymore, especially not when compared to the glamorous figure of Sarah, his stunning mistress. With her long legs and sparkling blue eyes, Sarah was everything he thought he wanted. An image of success, a trophy to flaunt in boardrooms and gala events. But every time he looked at Linda's photograph, he felt a conflicting mix of loyalty and shame. Why did I ever think I could balance both? Mark muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. He picked up the frame and stared at Linda, her unpretentious beauty contrasting sharply with the polished appearance of Sarah. His phone buzzed, jolting him from his reverie. It was a message from Sarah. "Can't wait for lunch, babe. Got some ideas for the meeting." A smile crept across his face, but it was tinged with anxiety. Bringing Sarah to the meeting felt like a betrayal, yet the thrill of it was intoxicating. He had known that the decision to bring Sarah instead of Linda was a gamble, but he craved the excitement, the way Sarah made him feel alive, and in that moment he convinced himself that it was worth the risk. He shot a text back, "Looking forward to it." With a deep breath, he stood up, smoothing down the sleeves of his tailored suit. He needed to focus. The restaurant was a buzz of energy, a trendy spot frequented by the city's elite. Mark arrived early, scanning the room for a glimpse of Sarah. As he waited, the tension in his chest tightened. He was both eager and apprehensive. When Sarah finally arrived, dressed in a form-fitting dress that hugged her curves, all of his worries seemed to dissolve. She flashed him a dazzling smile, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Hey there, handsome," she said, leaning in to give him a quick kiss on the cheek. "You clean up well?" "Thanks. You look amazing," he replied, unable to hide his admiration. They settled into a cozy booth, the atmosphere charged with flirtation. "So, are you ready to sweep everyone off their feet at the meeting?" she asked, her voice playful. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, hesitating. I just hope my colleagues are ready for you. You might outshine all of us." Sarah laughed, a melodic sound that drew attention from nearby tables. "Oh, I plan to. I've got some great ideas that will blow them away. Just think about how impressed they'll be when they see you with me." Mark's stomach twisted at the thought. Right, but what about Linda? Linda? She arched an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Is she coming?" Mark looked away, guilt gnawing at him. "No, I thought it would be better this way. I don't want her to feel uncomfortable." Sarah leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mark, you're the boss. You deserve to have someone who matches your ambition. It's time to stop pretending." He hesitated, her words stirring something deep within him. "I just don't want to hurt her," he said quietly. "Sweetheart, she has no idea what you're missing out on. Just think about how we can turn this meeting into a launching pad for our future." Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and for a moment he felt himself getting swept away in her enthusiasm. "All right," he said reluctantly, though uncertainty still lingered. "Let's do it." Later that evening, Mark returned home to the comforting scent of dinner wafting through the air. Linda was bustling around the kitchen, her hair tied back in a messy bun, a warm smile illuminating her face as she stirred a pot on the stove. "Hey, honey, you're home early," she exclaimed, turning to him with a cheerful expression. "How was your day?" "Busy," he replied, forcing a smile. He watched as she moved gracefully, completely at ease in her domesticity. She wore a simple sundress that he had once found charming, but now seemed to accentuate his feelings of inadequacy. "What's for dinner?" he asked, trying to inject some normalcy into the conversation. "Your favorite." I thought we could have a nice dinner together, just the two of us. I know you've been stressed with work, she said, her eyes sparkling with genuine affection. Mark felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Here she was, pouring her heart into their home while he was planning to introduce another woman into his professional life. That sounds great, Linda, he said, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. As they sat at the dining table, Linda spoke animatedly about her day, sharing stories about their neighbors and her latest gardening triumphs. Mark nodded along, but his mind drifted and his heart raced with the thought of Sarah. He felt a growing resentment towards Linda for not being the woman he wanted her to be, even as guilt clawed at him for feeling that way. Mark, you've been so distant lately. Is everything all right at work? She asked, her tone shifting slightly as she studied his face. Yeah, just a lot on my plate, he replied, trying to downplay his inner turmoil. You know how it is. Linda reached across the table, her hand covering his. You can talk to me, we're a team. Of course, he said, pulling his hand away, a sense of panic rising within him. I need to focus on some new projects. New projects? Like the meeting with Johnson? She asked, her brow furrowing with concern. Something like that, he muttered. Feeling the weight of her gaze, the conversation felt heavy, laden with unspoken words and hidden truths. As she continued to talk about their future, Mark's mind raced with thoughts of Sarah. He glanced at his phone, the temptation to text her overwhelming. Excuse me, I need to make a quick call, he said abruptly, standing up. Sure, honey, just don't be long, Linda replied, her voice filled with warmth and trust. Mark stepped outside, his heart pounding. He dialed Sarah's number, the decision to bring her to the meeting solidifying in his mind. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he confirmed, Yes, you're coming with me, I want you there. As he hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing an irreversible line, but the thrill of his choice pulsed through him, drowning out the guilt that lingered like a shadow. He took a deep breath and returned inside, a smile plastered on his face, ready to play the part of the devoted husband while harboring the secret that would soon unravel everything. The day of the meeting dawned with an unsettling mix of anticipation and anxiety hanging in the air, like the heavy humidity before a summer storm. Mark Thompson stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the umpteenth time, his mind racing with thoughts of how to present Sarah to his colleagues. He had spent years cultivating his reputation as a successful businessman, and today he was determined to showcase not only his professional prowess but also the allure of his new companion. Are you ready? Sarah's voice floated in from the adjoining room, pulling him from his reverie. He glanced at the reflection of the stunning woman who appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the morning light. The sleek, form-fitting dress she wore accentuated her curves, and her hair cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders. He felt a surge of pride swelling in his chest, but alongside it lurked the gnawing guilt that he had buried since the inception of their affair. Just about, he replied, forcing a smile as he turned to meet her gaze. You look incredible. Thank you, she said, a playful smile dancing on her lips. But I think I'll make an even bigger impression once we're in front of your colleagues. Mark chuckled, though the sound felt hollow in his chest. He knew Sarah was charming and intelligent, but he also understood the risks of bringing her into such a high-stakes environment. Let's just keep it professional, okay? This meeting is important. Of course, she replied, her tone teasingly innocent. I'll behave, but I can't promise I won't steal the show. As they stepped out of his apartment and into the elevator, Mark's heart raced. The elevator doors closed with a dull thud, trapping them in a small space filled with the scent of Sarah's perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and vanilla that seemed to cloud his judgment. He glanced at her, and for a moment he was lost in the depths of her eyes, forgetting the weight of his commitments to Linda. Arriving at the office, Mark felt the familiar hum of the corporate world surrounding him. Colleagues greeted him with nods and smiles, but their expressions shifted as they caught sight of Sarah walking beside him. Whispers spread like wildfire, and he could feel the weight of their gazes, a mix of admiration and envy. Hey Mark, who's the new star? Called out Tom, one of his coworkers, with an exaggerated wink. This is Sarah, Mark introduced, his chest puffing up with pride. She's joining us for the meeting today. Pleasure to meet you, Sarah said, her voice smooth and confident, easily commanding the attention of the room. She extended a hand, and several men, including Mr. Johnson, Mark's boss, leaned in a little too close, their eyes gleaming with interest. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," Mr. Johnson said, his tone almost conspiratorial. "I've heard a lot about you already." Mark felt a flicker of unease at the way Mr. Johnson's gaze lingered on Sarah, but he pushed the thought aside as they made their way to the conference room. The tension in his stomach tightened as they entered, the polished table gleaming under the bright lights. Once seated, Mark began the meeting, outlining the agenda with practiced ease. Sarah listened intently, her expressions shifting from curiosity to engagement as the discussions unfolded. Mark couldn't help but steal glances at her. She was a natural, effortlessly contributing her insights and opinions, captivating the attention of everyone in the room. "Great point, Sarah," Mr. Johnson said, nodding enthusiastically. "Your perspective on the market trends is spot on. I think we should consider moving in that direction." Mark's chest swelled with pride, but the unease in his gut grew stronger. He noticed the way Mr. Johnson leaned forward, his body language open and inviting as he engaged with Sarah. She responded with laughter, tossing her hair over her shoulder, and Mark's heart raced, not with excitement, but with an unsettling mix of jealousy and insecurity. As the meeting progressed, it became increasingly evident that Sarah was not only charming his colleagues, but also winning over Mr. Johnson. The air crackled with tension. Mark felt like an outsider in his own world, watching the woman he had brought to impress become the center of attention in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Let's take a break, shall we?" Mark finally suggested, trying to regain control of the situation. He stood up, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. "We can reconvene in 15 minutes. As the colleagues dispersed, Mark pulled Sarah aside, urgency bubbling beneath his calm facade. "You were amazing in there," he said, forcing a smile. "But let's not forget the purpose of the meeting, all right?" She looked at him, her expression shifting from delight to confusion. "What do you mean? I thought I was doing great." "You are," he reassured, though his words felt insincere even to his own ears. "But I need you to remember that I brought you here for professional reasons, not to attract attention." Sarah crossed her arms, a hint of defiance creeping into her posture. "Is that what this is about? You're worried I'm overshadowing you?" "No, it's not like that," Mark exclaimed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I just don't want anyone to think—" "What? That I'm just your trophy?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "That I'm here to make you look good?" Before he could respond, the door swung open and Mr. Johnson stepped back into the room, a broad smile plastered on his face. "Sarah, would you join me for a quick chat outside?" he asked, his tone casual but with an undertone that sent a jolt of panic through Mark. Sure," Sarah replied, glancing at Mark with an expression that was almost apologetic. As she followed Mr. Johnson out, Mark's heart sank. He stood there, feeling a chasm of uncertainty open beneath him. "Everything okay?" Tom asked, returning to the room. Mark forced a nod, but his mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. In just a matter of moments, the dynamics between them had shifted, and he was left grappling with the consequences of his choices. As the minutes ticked by, Mark paced the small conference room, his mind spiraling with thoughts of Sarah and Mr. Johnson. What were they talking about? Was she really interested in him, or was this merely a game to her? He had brought her into his world to impress his colleagues, but now he feared he might have miscalculated entirely. When Sarah finally returned, her expression was unreadable, and Mark's heart raced with anxiety. "What did he want?" he asked, his voice barely concealing the tension. "Oh, nothing much," Sarah said, brushing it off with a casual wave of her hand. "Just discussing some ideas about the project." Mark narrowed his eyes, sensing the evasiveness in her tone. "You sure? Because it didn't look like nothing." "Mark, it was just business," she insisted, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice. "Can we please focus on the meeting?" "Fine," he snapped, frustration boiling over, "but I need you to be honest with me." Just as she opened her mouth to respond, Mr. Johnson re-entered the room, his demeanor brimming with confidence. "All right, everyone, let's get back to it," he said, clapping his hands together. Mark felt a knot tightening in his chest as he took his seat, knowing that the tension in the room wouldn't dissipate easily. As the meeting resumed, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The once productive discussions now felt like a facade, hiding the cracks that had begun to form in his carefully constructed life. He shot furtive glances at Sarah, who seemed to slip effortlessly back into the role of the charming, insightful partner, while Mark felt more like a spectator in his own life. By the end of the meeting, Mark was exhausted, not just from the discussions, but from the emotional roller coaster that had unfolded in such a short time. As colleagues filed out, he turned to Sarah, searching for some semblance of reassurance. "Did I do okay?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of the meeting. "You were great," he replied, but the words felt hollow as he struggled to maintain a facade of confidence. But we need to talk." Before he could say more, he overheard Mr. Johnson's voice echoing through the corridor. "Sarah, how about we grab a drink after this? I'd love to hear more about your ideas." Mark's heart dropped. He felt the world around him tilt dangerously as he processed the implications of those words. Was this what he had invited into his life? The jealousy surged within him, and he clenched his fists, trying to control the anger rising in his throat. "Mark," Sarah began, but he cut her off, the simmering frustration erupting. "No, you don't get to brush this off," he snapped, his voice low but filled with intensity. "You can't just flirt with him and expect me to be okay with it." "Flirt?" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mark, I was just being professional." "Professional?" he echoed, incredulity dripping from his words. "You've got to be kidding me. You know how he looks at you." At that moment, the weight of their relationship seemed to shift, revealing the underlying fractures that had been masked by passion and desire. The air between them crackled with tension, and Mark felt himself spiraling. Mark Thompson's heart raced as he stormed out of the office, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He felt betrayed, confused, and angry, not only at Sarah, but at himself for allowing the day to spiral out of control. The echoes of the meeting lingered in his mind, particularly the way Sarah had effortlessly charmed everyone in the room, including his boss, Mr. Johnson. It felt as if he had unwittingly set the stage for his own downfall. As he walked down the bustling city street, Mark pulled out his phone, his fingers hesitating over Linda's contact. He wanted to hear her voice, to find solace in her familiarity, but guilt gnawed at him. He knew he had messed up, that he had used Sarah as a mere distraction from his own dissatisfaction. Still, the thought of confessing his internal turmoil felt unbearable. Finally, he pressed the call button. The phone rang, each tone amplifying his anxiety until Linda's voice broke through. "Mark, is everything okay?" she asked, her concern palpable even through the phone. "Yeah, everything's fine," he replied, trying to keep his tone light despite the storm brewing inside him. "Just a long day at work." "Are you sure? You sound off," she pressed, and Mark could picture her frowning, her brow furrowing with worry. "I'm fine, really. Just a bit stressed about the meeting," he said, swallowing hard. "I'll be home soon." "Okay, I'll have dinner ready," Linda responded, her voice softening. "I miss you." Mark felt another pang of guilt. He missed her too, but the thought of returning home, where the reality of his choices loomed large, filled him with dread. "I'll see you soon," he said, hanging up before he could say anything more. He headed to their usual bar, a cozy spot dimly lit with soft music playing in the background. As he entered, Mark spotted Sarah sitting at their regular table, her laughter ringing out like a siren's call. She looked stunning, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her figure accentuated by a fitted dress that left little to the imagination. As he approached, he could see the way her eyes sparkled, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside him. "Hey, you made it!" Sarah exclaimed, her smile brightening the room. She stood up and leaned in for a kiss, but Mark hesitated, the memory of their earlier argument weighing heavily on him. "Yeah, I'm here," he said, forcing a smile as he slid into the seat opposite her. "We need to talk about what happened today." Sarah's expression shifted, a hint of annoyance crossing her features. "What's there to talk about? I thought I did great in the meeting." She leaned back, crossing her arms defensively. "I mean, everyone loved my ideas." Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "That's not the point, Sarah. You were great, but it felt like you were more interested in impressing Mr. Johnson than supporting me." Her eyes narrowed as she shot back. "Is that what you really think? I was there to help you, to show that I could be an asset, but you treat me like a trophy, something to parade around instead of a partner." Mark felt anger bubbling up inside him, but he quickly squashed it. "I never meant for it to be that way. I wanted you to shine, but maybe I should have thought about how it would look, how it would make Linda feel." "Linda?" Sarah scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're still hung up on her? You brought me in to replace her, Mark. You wanted to impress your colleagues, not just show off your mistress. He clenched his fists under the table, frustration boiling over. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I wanted to feel proud of my life. I wanted to feel like I'm not settling for less. Sarah's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. But at what cost? You're tearing yourself apart, and for what? A fleeting moment of validation? Mark's heart raced as he felt the walls closing in around him. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could have both, someone exciting and someone stable, but it's just chaos. Maybe it's time to choose, Mark, Sarah suggested, leaning in closer. You can't keep straddling two worlds, it's not fair to any of us. Her words hung heavy in the air, a challenge he wasn't ready to face. Just then the bartender approached, interrupting the tension. What can I get you guys? He asked, looking between them with a curious eyebrow raised. Just a couple of drinks, Mark replied, forcing a smile. I'll have a whiskey neat. I'll take a mojito, Sarah said, her demeanor shifting back to one of lightness, and make it strong. As the bartender walked away, Sarah turned her attention back to Mark, her eyes glinting mischievously. You know, despite everything, I still find you incredibly attractive when you're all broody and intense. Mark felt an involuntary smile tug at his lips, but it quickly faded as he remembered the chaos they were in. Do you think we can really get through this? I mean, everything feels so messed up right now. Of course we can, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. All relationships go through rough patches, we just need to find a way to make it work. Before he could respond, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his hand. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through him, and for a moment, he allowed himself to forget the turmoil that awaited him at home. Let's not think about everything else right now. Just you and me, she urged, her voice low and inviting. Mark hesitated, caught between desire and guilt, but as she leaned in closer, he felt the pull of her presence, the intoxicating allure of what they shared. Maybe this was what he needed, a moment to escape, to live free of the constraints of his life. He leaned in, their lips meeting in a heated kiss that sent sparks flying. The world around them faded, and for that brief moment, nothing else mattered. But as they pulled away, the weight of reality crashed back down and Mark's guilt returned with a vengeance. Meanwhile, across town, Linda sat alone in their quiet home, the scent of her homemade dinner wafting through the air. She had spent the day trying to push away her feelings of inadequacy, determined to be the strong partner Mark needed. But the more she thought about their relationship, the more she felt the gnawing sense of neglect. He's been distant, she murmured to herself, stirring the pot on the stove. Maybe I should do something special to remind him of what we have. A surge of determination coursed through her. She would surprise him at the office tomorrow. She would show him that she was still the woman he fell in love with, that she could be just as impressive in her own right. With a newfound sense of purpose, Linda set the table, her heart hopeful despite the uncertainties. She believed that if she could just get Mark to see her in a different light, everything would return to normal, but little did she know that her plans would soon unravel in ways she could never have anticipated. As she finished setting the table, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that Mark's world had begun to shift in ways she hadn't yet understood. And as she glanced at their wedding photo on the wall, a sense of foreboding settled in her chest, urging her to prepare for whatever storm was brewing on the horizon. Linda stood at the entrance of their darkened home, her heart racing as she waited for Mark to return. The scent of the dinner she had prepared lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within her. She had spent the evening replaying the scene she had stumbled upon at Mark's office. Sarah, laughing, surrounded by his colleagues, effortlessly embodying the glamorous life Linda had never felt she could provide. The revelation felt like a knife twisting in her gut. When the door clicked open, Linda turned to face Mark, her expression a mixture of anger and hurt. He stepped inside, his demeanor shifting from casual to tense as he caught sight of her. "Linda," he began, his voice strained. "I can explain." "Explain what, Mark?" she shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. "That you took your mistress to a business meeting? That you made a fool of me in front of your colleagues?" Mark's brow furrowed as he stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. "It's not like that. I thought—" "You thought what?" she interrupted, crossing her arms defensively. "That I wouldn't care? That I wouldn't notice how much you've changed? You're ashamed of me, aren't you? He opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. The truth was he had felt embarrassed not just by Linda's appearance, but by the life they had built together, which now seemed so mundane compared to the excitement Sarah offered. I'm not ashamed of you, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to, I don't know, impress everyone. Linda's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Impress them by bringing her? You think they care about who you're dating? They care about your business acumen, Mark. You're the one who turned this into some twisted game. Mark clenched his fists, the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I thought it would show I'm successful and that I'm desirable, he admitted, his voice shaky. Desirable? She scoffed, taking a step back as if his words physically repulsed her. You don't need a trophy to prove that. You have a wife who loves you, who has stood by you through everything, but you're too busy chasing whatever fantasy you think she represents. Linda, please, he pleaded, his frustration mounting. You don't understand how hard it is. I'm trying to build something here, and it felt like I needed something more to show for it. Something more? She echoed, her voice rising. What, a pretty face beside you? Is that what you think makes you a man? Do you even see me anymore? The silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. Linda could feel the walls closing in, her heart pounding in her chest as she struggled to keep her composure. You think I don't know how you look at her? How you talk about her? You think I didn't notice how you've been pulling away? Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling over. You don't know what it's like. I'm trying to keep everything together. This business, this life, it's all so much pressure, see? Pressure? Linda's voice broke, the weight of her own emotions crashing down. What about my pressure? Do you think I just sit at home, waiting for you to decide I'm good enough to be seen with? I've sacrificed so much for us, and you throw it all away for a fleeting moment of validation? I never meant to hurt you, Mark said, his voice dropping to a whisper, the fight leaving him as he took a step closer. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything, Mark, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. You've made your choice clear. You chose her over me. Mark shook his head, desperation creeping into his tone. It was a mistake, Linda. I didn't think it through. I was caught up in the moment. Caught up in the moment? She repeated, incredulous. This isn't just some fleeting moment for me. This is my life, our life. You're breaking it apart. As the tears began to spill down her cheeks, Linda felt a part of her shatter. The man she had loved, the man who had promised to build a future with her, was standing right in front of her, but he felt like a stranger. Mark's gaze softened, his heart aching for the pain he had caused. He stepped forward, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. Don't, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. Just don't. Mark's heart sank as he watched her retreat, the distance between them growing palpable. I can fix this, he said, almost desperately. I'll talk to Sarah. I'll end it. It's not just about her, Mark. It's about us. You've already chosen her. By bringing her into our lives, you've shown me exactly where I stand. Linda's voice cracked, and she turned away, unable to bear the sight of him anymore. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of Linda's quiet sobs. Mark felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet, the weight of his choices crashing down on him. He had never intended for any of this to happen. He had merely wanted to impress his colleagues, to feel important, but now he was standing at the precipice of losing everything he had ever cared about. I'm so sorry, he whispered, the words feeling inadequate. Linda turned back to face him, her expression resolute despite the tears streaming down her face. Sorry isn't enough, Mark. It's too late for apologies. You need to decide what you really want because I can't keep doing this. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, interrupting the tension that hung thick in the air. They both looked toward the entrance, and Mark's stomach dropped. He knew who it was. Don't, Linda said, her voice a mix of warning and resignation. Just don't answer it. But before Mark could process her words, he found himself moving toward the door, compelled by a mix of guilt and obligation. As he swung it open, he was met with the unexpected sight of Sarah, her bright smile dimmed by the awareness of the atmosphere in the room. Hey, I thought we could celebrate, she said, holding a bottle of wine, her enthusiasm palpable. But as her gaze shifted past Mark to Linda, the smile faltered. Oh, I didn't realize you two were... Sarah, this isn't a good time, Mark interrupted, the weight of the moment crashing down around him. What's going on? Sarah asked, confusion etched across her features. Linda stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. What's going on is that your presence here is the last thing Mark needs right now. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Linda raised a hand. No, let me speak. You've already caused enough damage. I won't allow you to manipulate him further. Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of realization passing through them. Manipulate? I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I thought we were all on the same page. Clearly, we're not, Linda shot back, her voice firm. Mark needs to make a choice about the life he wants, and it's not going to be dictated by you. Mark felt the tension between the two women, and for a moment he was paralyzed, caught between their fiery emotions. This isn't what I wanted, he finally said, his voice cracking. I just wanted to be successful But as the words left his mouth, he realized how hollow they sounded. Success was meaningless if it came at the cost of his marriage. The weight of his choices settled heavily on his shoulders, and he felt the invisible thread that once connected them slowly unraveling. I can't do this anymore, Linda said quietly, her voice breaking as she turned toward the staircase, her back straight but her heart heavy. I need time to think. Linda, wait. Mark reached out, but she didn't turn back. With each step she took, he felt the chasm between them widen, as if she were walking away from a life he had once cherished. As she disappeared down the hall, he turned back to Sarah, who stood there looking lost. What have I done? He murmured, the reality of his situation crashing down around him. I didn't mean to come at a bad time, Sarah said softly, the warmth in her voice replaced by uncertainty. I thought we could talk about the meeting and how well it went. Mark shook his head, feeling the weight of regret suffocating him. It doesn't matter how well it went. I've messed everything up. I don't even know what I want anymore. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Mark felt the emptiness in his heart, the realization that the choices he had made had consequences far beyond the business meeting he had so desperately wanted to impress. He was left standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take, and the implications of his decisions loomed over him like a dark cloud. Maybe you need to figure things out, Sarah said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to be the reason you lose your marriage. Mark turned to her, the sorrow in his eyes mirroring her own. But I brought you into this. I made a choice, and now I have Mark's heart raced as he paced the dimly lit room of his upscale apartment. The news of Mr. Johnson's plans to take Sarah to the high-profile gala had struck him like a bolt of lightning. He could envision them together, laughing and mingling, while he sat at home, a mere shadow of the man he once was. Jealousy clawed at him, gnawing at the edges of his composure. He felt a storm of emotions welling up inside him, anger, insecurity, and a desperate need to reclaim what he had lost. She's playing you, Mark, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. You've got to confront her. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, determination propelling him toward the gala venue. The air outside was crisp, the city skyline glittering like 1,000 diamonds against the night sky. As Mark arrived at the gala, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The venue was extravagant, filled with the elite of the business world, their laughter and chatter echoing in the grand hall. He spotted Sarah instantly, her red dress flowing like liquid silk, a stark contrast to the muted tones of the evening. She stood with Mr. Johnson, their chemistry palpable as they shared a laugh, the kind that made Mark's stomach churn. Damn it, he whispered, his fists clenching at his sides. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come, and pushed through the crowd toward them. Sarah, he called, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. The two turned, surprise flickering across their faces. Mark? Sarah's tone was laced with confusion. What are you doing here? I came to talk, he said, forcing a calmness he didn't feel. In private. Mr. Johnson raised an eyebrow, his expression a mix of amusement and curiosity. Is everything all right, Mark? You look a bit agitated. Everything's fine, Mark snapped, the tension in his voice unmistakable. Just a private conversation with my girlfriend. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Mark took her arm, leading her away from the crowd. He could feel the eyes of the gala attendees on them, whispers trailing behind as they made their way to a quieter corner of the venue. What's this about? she asked, a mixture of concern and irritation in her voice. Mark leaned closer, lowering his voice. I know about the gala, Sarah. I know Johnson is planning to take you as his date. Are you really going to let him parade you around like some trophy? She crossed her arms, her expression shifting from surprise to anger. You have no right to dictate who I spend my time with, Mark. You're the one who brought me into your world, remember? I didn't ask for any of this. Right, because you're just so innocent in all of this, he shot back, his frustration boiling over. You're playing a dangerous game, and I won't let you get hurt. Get hurt? She echoed incredulously. Or is it that you're afraid of losing me? You only care about how this looks for you, don't you? Mark clenched his jaw, the truth of her words stinging. I care about you, but I care about my career too. Do you think this is just a fun little fling for me? You think I want to see you with him? Her eyes narrowed. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you chose to bring me into a meeting with your colleagues instead of your wife. You want to keep me a secret, Mark, but that's not what I signed up for. He stepped back, realization hitting him like a freight train. This isn't just about us, is it? You're using me as much as I'm using you. Isn't that the truth? She shot back, her voice rising. You think I'm just some pretty face to impress your friends? You're the one who brought me here to validate your ego. Mark felt the air leave his lungs as he processed her words. I didn't mean for it to be like this, Sarah. I thought we were building something real. Real? She laughed bitterly. You mean your version of real, where I play the role of the perfect mistress? Newsflash, Mark. I have my ambitions too. I'm not just here to make you look good. Is that what you think? That I see you as a trophy? He ran a frustrated hand over his face, feeling the weight of her accusations. I never wanted to treat you like that. Then stop acting like it. You're not the only one who has something to lose here. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm not just some girl you can flaunt at business meetings to make yourself feel better. As Mark opened his mouth to respond, he felt a wave of defeat wash over him. The fight had drained from the conversation, leaving nothing but raw honesty between them. What do you want from me, Sarah? She hesitated, her expression softening for a fleeting moment. I want to know that you care about me for who I am, not just what I can do for you. This isn't just a game to me. Mark stared into her eyes, searching for any glimmer of the connection they once shared. I do care about you, but I'm scared, Sarah. I'm scared of what this means for my life, for Linda. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to ruin everything. I can't be the reason your life falls apart, Mark. You need to figure out what you want. She stepped back, the distance between them feeling insurmountable. If you think I'm just going to sit back and let you dictate my life, then maybe we need to reevaluate this whole situation. Before Mark could respond, she turned and walked back toward Mr. Johnson, leaving him standing in the shadows of the gala, a whirlwind of emotions crashing around him. He watched as Sarah laughed at something Johnson said, and his heart sank further into a pit of despair. Great job, Mark, he muttered under his breath, feeling the walls close in around him. You've really messed this up. As he stood there, a storm of regret and jealousy swirling in his chest, he realized that this was just the beginning of a fallout that could change everything. The night felt heavy, and he wondered if he had lost Sarah for good. As the tension in the air thickened like the heavy velvet drapes of the gala, Mark's heart raced. He felt the weight of the arguments hanging over him, the echoes of accusation still ringing in his ears. Just as he opened his mouth to deliver another retort to Sarah, a familiar voice broke through the chaos. Mark! Linda's voice was strong, cutting through the noise like a knife. She stood at the entrance, her presence commanding the attention of the room. The soft glow of chandelier lights caught her hair, which shimmered like spun gold, framing her face with an unexpected radiance. Dressed in a sleek black gown that hugged her curves and exuded confidence, she was a vision that took Mark by surprise. Linda? Mark's voice faltered, disbelief etched across his features. He had never expected her to show up here, and certainly not like this. His chest tightened as he noticed the determination in her eyes, a stark contrast to the insecurities that had plagued her in recent months. What are you doing here? Mark stammered, a tinge of panic creeping into his voice as he glanced nervously at Sarah and Mr. Johnson. I came to see you, she replied, her gaze darting between Mark and Sarah, taking in the tension brewing like a storm. But it seems I've arrived just in time. Linda, you shouldn't be here, this isn't... Mark started, but Linda held up her hand, silencing him. No, Mark, you've had your chance to speak. Now it's my turn. She stepped forward, her posture straightening as she found her footing in the midst of the chaos. I'm not afraid of you or your little games anymore. Mark's heart raced as he watched her, a mix of admiration and disbelief flooding his senses. Could this really be the same woman who had seemed so fragile only days ago? Linda continued, her voice firm yet calm. I have something to share, and I think it's time everyone knows. The room was silent, all eyes now on Linda. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I've been working on a business project of my own, something that I've kept under wraps because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it without relying on anyone else, especially you, Mark. Mark's stomach dropped. What? He blurted, his mind racing. You never mentioned anything about a project. Of course I didn't. You were too busy parading Sarah around like some trophy, Linda shot back, her eyes blazing with conviction. But I pitched my idea to a group of investors last week, and they were impressed. In fact, I've secured a meeting with Mr. Johnson to discuss potential partnerships. Mr. Johnson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Is that so? He asked, his curiosity piqued. The tension in the air shifted slightly as the focus turned to Linda, and Mark felt a mix of dread and admiration swell within him. Yes. Linda replied with newfound confidence. I know you dismissed my ideas before, but I'm not the same woman you used to know. I've done my research, and I believe my project can outshine anything you've ever worked on, Mark. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. He had always underestimated Linda, but now, seeing her stand in front of him, fierce and determined, he was filled with a sense of dread. You can't be serious. He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. You think you can just waltz in here and challenge my career? I'm not challenging you, Mark. I'm challenging the idea that I'm not good enough, she declared, her voice steady. For too long, I let you dictate my worth. No more. I'm taking control of my life. The room buzzed with whispers as attendees exchanged glances, drawn into the unexpected drama unfolding before them. Sarah, her expression shifting from smug satisfaction to annoyance, stepped forward. Isn't this cute, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. The neglected wife finally gets a moment in the spotlight, but let's be real, Linda. Do you really think you can compete with me? With us? Linda turned to Sarah, her expression unyielding. This isn't about you, Sarah. This is about me claiming my space. You may have charmed everyone tonight, but charm doesn't equate to substance. I have ideas, passion, and the drive to see them through. What do you have besides looks? Mark felt the tension rise again, as if the air was thickening with unspoken words. He glanced at Sarah, who looked momentarily taken aback by Linda's boldness. It was a side of Linda he had never witnessed before, and it left him both proud and bewildered. Enough of this, Sarah snapped, trying to regain her composure. Mark, you know I'm the one who can take your career to the next level. You need to make a choice here, me or her. Mark's heart raced as he felt the weight of her words. He had been so consumed by jealousy and insecurity that he had never fully grasped the depth of Linda's potential. I can't just choose, he started, but Linda interrupted. Choose, Mark, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. Choose who you want to stand by. I refuse to be second best, and I won't be used as a pawn in your games anymore. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Mark stood in the middle of the chaos, suddenly aware of the gravity of his choices. He had built his life around superficial success, prioritizing appearances over genuine connections. Now, confronted with Linda's strength and Sarah's allure, he realized that he had taken everything for granted. He began, but the words wouldn't come. Sarah stepped closer to him, her expression softening momentarily. Mark, we can make this work. We're a team. But Linda shook her head, her determination unwavering. You don't need to choose between us, Mark. You need to choose yourself. I'm moving forward, with or without you, and I'm not looking back. As she spoke, Mark saw something shift within Sarah. The confidence she had worn like armor began to crack. What are you saying? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. You can't just leave. I can, Linda replied, her tone resolute, and I will. I'm leaving both of you behind. I found my voice, and it's time I used it. With that, Linda turned on her heel and walked away, her head held high. Mark felt a rush of emotions. Regret, admiration, and a sense of loss all at once. He had underestimated her, and now it was too late to turn back. As Linda exited the gala, her silhouette framed by the elegant lights, Mark felt the finality of her decision hit him like a tidal wave. He turned to Sarah, who was staring after Linda, disbelief etched across her face. "What just happened?" she murmured, confusion clouding her features. "I don't know," Mark admitted, the reality of the moment settling in like a heavy fog. "But I think I lost the best part of my life tonight." In that moment, he realized that Linda's departure was not just about leaving him, it was about her claiming her own identity and strength. As Sarah's presence faded into the background, Mark was left standing alone, forced to confront the consequences of his choices and the undeniable strength of the woman he had taken for granted.